I'm Dr. Ali Mohammadi. I'm Assistant Professor of English Language and Literature in Istanbul Unizel University. My research title is Shakespeare's Sisters and the Crisis of Women's Autonomy, a critical analysis of A Room of One's Own, written by Virginia Woolf. My study actually explored the root causes of women's lack of writing in literature by digging into Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. I can say her masterpiece. Virginia Woolf was the pioneer of feminist literary criticism in the 20th century. She was hugely preoccupied throughout her writing life with the role of women in history and with the relationship of women and fiction. Besides, she wrote continuously about the difficulties of women's writing and of writing as a woman. This research aims to mirror a number of key arguments concerning women's issues: the social and economic conditions necessary for writing, the problem of a tradition of women's writing, the concept of a female sentence articulating women's voices and values, and the idea of androgynous aesthetics in which an author would be able to write free from an awareness of their sex as a male or female. Woolf was very cognizant of making any definitive assertions about women's writing, or at least in terms of its style or form. Indeed, much of the essay, Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, is taken up with her reflections on the lack of women's writing over the history of English literature. The reason for this absence of female writing does not just spring from the deficiency of genius, but of material circumstances and facilities. Additionally, the demands of the domestic household, the poverty of education available to women, and the laws that denied married women's ownership of funds or property made it virtually impossible for women to take up writing as a profession. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she's to write fiction. This famous line, written by the British novelist Virginia Woolf, tackled head on the question of why men, rather than women, had authored a large proportion of the greatest works of literature. Writing in 1929, Virginia Woolf argued that the future actually of women's participation and their figure in art and literature dependent on deeply entrenched ideas about their capabilities and suitable aspirations. Her essay, A Room of One's Own, spoke of education as the key to women's emancipation. Woolf thought education could provide women with a voice they could use to contribute to culture and sought to highlight the discrepancies between what men and women can hope to achieve in a patriarchal society. The central idea of her essay was women have not been given the space in which to think, read, and develop as intellectuals. Besides, they were excluded for centuries from participating in public life and rendered dependent on men for financial security. She noted that women have historically lacked both the material means and the legal freedom to voice their own ideas. Woolf illustrates her point by inventing a fictional female character, Shakespeare's sister, Judith Shakespeare. In other words, in contrast to her brother William Shakespeare, Judith Shakespeare does not have the opportunity to go to school, nor is she encouraged in her efforts to read or write or do anything similar to what her brother does. Instead, she finds herself trapped in a home where she is actively discouraged from pursuing creative goals. Predictably, Judith never writes down her thoughts, so her ideas go unexpressed to be lost in history. Woolf suggests that William Shakespeare's success was not solely the product of his talent. He was offered opportunities to explore and expand his creative calling by participating in education, public life, and the chance of learning in a very different atmosphere, which was totally patriarchal and under men's ruling. And he had also this opportunity of earning a living as a professional writer. Woolf saw all of these factors vital to Shakespeare's success. Had he been born a woman, I mean, if Shakespeare were a woman, he would not have had the opportunity to write and actually become a very successful figure as we know him today. And we, as a culture, would have missed out on a great deal of poetry, plays, and influence. Judith Shakespeare's actually fictional sisters was created by Woolf as a metaphor. She shows the displacement of women from literature and the arts from public life and cultures. The silencing of her character serves to remind readers of the limitations that society has historically placed on women. But we are invited to wonder how many literary greats might have been if only aspiring women writers had been granted the same chances as their male counterparts. Today, Woolf's essays are still studied as a foundational contribution to modern feminism, or modern feminist thought, in other words. Throughout decades, there were numerous debates about the equality of women and men. And it seems like these arguments are unlikely to be solved by time soon. A surprising number of individuals write and talk about the matters, feminism, and this enthusiasm makes the subject quite common. There are plenty of authors, journalists, opinion columnists, and many others who comment about the rights of women and men. Furthermore, any organization called the national, there are lots of organizations in the world now for women, such as National Organization for Women, or as it is known as NOW, was founded to defend women's rights. One of the most significant and influential pioneers in this regard is Virginia Woolf, with no question. She has written several works, including To the Lighthouse, Mrs. Dalloway, Orlando, and so on and so forth. But the most important of all is A Room of One's Own, and I call it Virginia Woolf's masterpiece. In this actually extended essay, it's of course a combination of a couple of letters, Woolf tries to find an answer for a concrete question that is asked to women all the time. And the question is this: if women are so gifted in literature, why is not there a woman artist as talented as Shakespeare? In order to give a satisfactory answer to this ageless question, the narrator talks about her daily life and scrolls through her ideas, her memories and struggles as a woman at the beginning of the 20th century. Give her the inspiration, of course, she requires. The amount of inspiration that she's looking for and she needs. The essay starts as the narrator walks by a pond and wonders about her main subject. And the main subject is this: women and fiction. She uses daily happenings to illustrate kinds of segregations that she struggles with. For instance, at the beginning of the book, the narrator comes across vile discrimination and heads towards the library to perpetuate her work on women and fiction, where she again experiences a setback by being told that women are not allowed in the library. These and more discriminations are stated as the story carries on. As a matter of fact, personally speaking, there are 6 takeaways from A Room of One's Own, in my opinion. First and foremost, women need time, space, and money to write. To illustrate in this book, or in this essay, such an extended work, which I can call actually a book as well, Virginia Woolf talks a lot about the differences in work responsibilities within the household. Women were traditionally overseers of the household, raising children, or had manual laboring jobs. Put it differently, the idea is that if you are so busy raising family or raising kids and everyone is in a shared space, you don't have the capacity to think as creatively as you would if you had a certain space or a room of your own to have some quiet time, think creatively, and put that thought or your ideas actually to papers. To give someone a room of one's own also means that they do probably need money. Therefore, there's a certain amount of income that you would need to have to even have a room of your own, a certain size of house and everything like that, including facilities, actually, which are the basic facilities for writing and developing yours or flourishing your writing talent. However, quite literally, the money that you would need for ink, papers, knowledge, access to people who are a part of the publishing industry to get your pieces out. And this actually knowledge is very important. Virginia speaks to a number of women writers of notoriety of her time, and talks about whether they have children or not, whether they are married or not, and that it is a wonder to her in certain situations where they didn't have a room of their own and they hid their writings from the people who lived within the same house. I mean, like their family members, husband, I don't know, children, or I don't know if they are kind of, extended families, maybe their father and mothers, if they are living together. Indeed, at that time, it was still a great deal that despite all these circumstances, they came up with these really great, noteworthy and popular pieces that we all know today. The second point, in my opinion, is most of the men or women of notoriety, I mean, those who are infamous, in the writing role, were also wealthy and affluent. Virginia Woolf talks about not just women, but men who have some of the most notable writings and who are the most popular authors or the most well-respected, that a good proportion, like most of these people who fall within this group, are all people who are affluent and wealthy. Again, people who have the access to facilities, I mean, time, money, in other words, time, talent, and treasures. I call it a triangle of T-triangle. Again, I say time, talent, and treasures. To be able to write down these stories, to create, to think creatively, to visit other countries, to inspire new writing pieces. These kind of people could finally become successful and make their actually dream come true. There was a direct correlation between people who have more access, more money, and how well they are writing. Thinking of the third point, men write a lot about women, but really, they really know very little about women. Of course, it is a bit funny. I didn't know Virginia Woolf was so sassy. There was a point where she went into a library and pulled down every book that was written about a woman or about women by a man. It shows that how furious she was, because she's obviously considered as the one of the pioneers of modern feminism. Besides, in her small sample research that she's doing in the library back then, she opens one book that says one thing about women, then opens another one, and there's a book that says something else, completely different, or sometimes opposite at sometimes, about them. So this contradiction makes her so furious. And she says that there's lots of men who like to write about women, research women, I mean, men do a lot of investigation about women, or add them to their stories. Nonetheless, they are really just like secondary characters to the main character, who was a man. It means no matter what women do, men are still controlling the society, and women are considered as secondary or second-class citizen compared to men in the society. Hence, the reflection of the women actually is either this creature who lives at extremes, or is only visible because she serves in support of the main characters, namely man. The fourth key point that, the fourth key element in the rest of my previous discussion deals with the ways to be great writers. You must be androgynous. Do not lead with your sex or try to prove points with your writing related to your sex. Here, Virginia Woolf speaks a little bit about how men and women are different, and there are things that men will never get about women, and equally there are things that women will never get about men. The tone that you use in your writing can show whether you are a man or a woman, and that you're trying to prove that you're just as good as a woman, or trying to prove that you're just as good as a man, or better than him or her. It should also be noted that there are always men who try to put down women or may have an undertone of someone who hurts them. The fact of the matter, though, is psychologically, everyone needs to have a little bit of both sexes to be called an ordinary human. And of course, I should refer to one quote from Samuel Taylor Coleridge, British romantic poet, who said that great minds are a combination of both males and females. Having realized so, this critical and inveterate issue of the female suppression and oppression to a large extent will be ironed out, in my opinion. The fifth backswing addresses women again. Even if your writing is bad, that's what I actually inferred from Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. Even if your writing is bad, write anyway about whatever you want. I suppose this is pretty straight to the point. At that point and time, there was a huge difference in the number of the books that were published by men and women. Of course, women far more scarce than men because of the access, creative opportunities, money, space, and so on and so forth that I just brushed up on. What she was getting at was that although she was called to write about feminine fiction, she wanted to encourage women not simply to write about one thing, but to write about a wide variety of subjects, such as geology, physics, math, space, or family dramas, or whatever they wanted to. And even if it's not very good, it's still present. It still has the opportunity to take up space and to be discovered by someone, to build off of each door that is opened by a woman who publishes a book, provides an opportunity for the next woman to step through and create something different. Lastly, and more humorously, it helps when you have a rich aunt who dies and leaves you money. That's what Virginia Woolf actually emphasizes in the last part. This is something that was referenced to by Virginia Woolf so many times throughout the book, that Virginia had an aunt who passed away as a result of a horse riding accident and left her roughly $5,000 a year. Moreover, she talks a lot about how that annual allocation, $5,000, provided so much freedom to her, and even freedom from men in general. She talks about how she doesn't really need a relationship with men if they are to provide. If the men are the main player of life, then she no longer needs that, and just talks a lot about how money provided not only access and time, but freedom from the patriarchal society of the time, as well as freedom to think in a creative way and pursue whatever pastimes that she wanted. It always helps if you have a moneyed, affluent, rich, wealthy aunt or uncle, depending on your life conditions, that can set you straight on the path to write a book or do whatever your little heart actually wishes and desires. Today, feminism is a much debated issue of society. Referring to Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, the dominant theme is the feminism and supporting women's rights. Like I mentioned, feminism is a highly controversial subject these days in society, in almost every society. People from many different countries, ethnicities, and religious backgrounds have various ideas about the matter at hand. Feminism itself concerns both social and political groups, to say the least. Whatever setting it may be in, feminism concerns about a woman and her struggles in that environment. Different traditions and cultures have effects on male and female alike. Similarly, in the aspect of feminism and gender equality. So it is not simply targeting, violation of female rights does not simply target women, but at some point targets the men's right as well. Seems kind of weird, doesn't it? There are some cliche examples of the number of feminist activities in high-income countries like mostly Scandinavian, such as Switzerland, Denmark, Finland, Norway, and a couple of others. These societies have achieved the modern definition of gender, gender equality, no sexual discrimination or something like that, or what can also be called equal opportunity. It is not witty to claim that those countries had a long way to go until they achieved contemporary civilization. Nevertheless, the world, this world, is not only formed by them. In some other countries, such as Saudi Arabia or a number of African countries, they do not encourage and even tolerate sometimes any kind of feminist activity or organization or association or anything of the kind, let alone willingly setting laws and regulations for women. The lives of women who live as minorities or are disliked or distasted actually for any reason are much harder than those who live in, say, Scandinavian countries. The way I mentioned actually, and how they are treated, in these two opposite, I can say, poles of the world. They have to struggle with laws and traditions at the same time, along with people's obscurant ideas and sometimes backward ideas. Sometimes not only women, but men too experience discrimination towards themselves. Racism combined with gender discrimination creates a nemesis and hatred and a sense of animosity for women of colors. And this is something that has to be taken into account seriously, in my opinion. Pre-modern feminism contributed little to nothing, almost little to nothing, to Black women's rights, because it was not designed to deal with such deeply rooted and complex problems. As proposed by Gorfati and Medini, two Muslim feminist writers, in practice, feminism concentrated on the needs of the middle-class white women in Britain and America, while posing as the movement for the emancipation of women globally. Kind of controversial. Without a doubt, the most significant part of A Room of One's Own is the part in chapter 3, where the narrators introduces a fictional characters as William Shakespeare's sisters. A couple of minutes ago, of course, I touched on it and I scratched the surface, but now I'm going to just go to some details. She imagines these characters to drive her point home better. Her name is Judith Shakespeare's, and she's the gifted sister of, William Shakespeare's. William was an ordinary boy when he was young, and his ambition and his actually desires were almost the same as his peers, except for his taste and particular talent for the theaters. Of course, this is undeniable fact. While he would climb the ladders of his artistic careers slowly but surely, his sister Judith would only stay home and do household chores because her parents wouldn't let her chase and pursue a career in theater in London or anywhere else. Although she was as extraordinarily talented and imaginative as her brothers in terms of theaters, she did not have the rights nor opportunities that her brother had. Therefore, she remained at home. Even if she had a few pages of paper to read and write on, she could not let anyone see them because she was simply not allowed to do so. We imagine her discussing with her parents about her passion for the theater, explaining her parents, let's say programs and plans to them, but her parents wouldn't listen. Woolf stresses that they would have spoken sharply but kindly, for they were substantial people who knew the conditions of life for a woman and loved their daughters. Indeed, more likely than not, she was the apple of her father's eye. Firstly, they would talk calmly and patiently, for they wished to marry her away for her own good. When she refused to do so, her family would beat her up physically or play on her heartstrings to get her to marry someone and not to put shame, or in order not to put shame on their family. Finding no escape from the dilemmas of marriage, one night she would make her belongings actually up and run away to London in order to pursue her dream, or maybe her dreams. What would it be like if she made it to London? to a theater where she can work and practice her talents, what would people's reaction be if she told them that she wanted to perform in that very theater alongside men? Most probably they would laugh at her face and mock her for being a half-wit, because making a career in acting as a woman was not acceptable at that time. She would ask for a job to earn a crust at least, but no, the answer is definitely no. The patriarchal order was too common in that area for her young mind to comprehend. If she were to create fiction or write theaters or perform in the theaters as an artist, she must have been born in either a rich family or a noble one, or both. And with this point, I come to the end of my summary of my